moderating today's panel. So welcome to everybody. We're very happy to having you with us for this side event, which is called Businesses Driving a Sustainable Future, Disability Inclusive Employment, and ESG. ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance. So this will be the acronym of the day. So we'll start with this side event, which is organized in the framework of the 17th session of the UN Conference of States Parties to the UNCPD. So the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. With regard to the purpose of this session today, as you may know, there are approximately 1.3 billion persons with disabilities in the world, and most of them are still outside the labor market. Indeed, the ILO data, so the data of the International Labour Organization, shows that 7 in 10 persons with disabilities are still totally outside the labor market, compared to 7 to 4 in 10 persons without disabilities, so about almost twice more proportionally. Yet we have the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and despite its adoption 2 decades ago, a lot remains to the employment of persons with disabilities. And indeed, the employment of persons with disabilities is part of the 3 thematic 17th session of the Conference of States Parties that will be starting tomorrow officially. I will give more details on the session, but first of all, let's start with a few accessibility features. That's quite important. And so first of all, we have international sign in this sign. And for those who need that more particularly, please feel free to pin the interpreters who are on the line. We're also providing live captioning in English, French, and Spanish. And our excellent colleagues from Geneva who are on the line as well will support and drop the link in the chat, so you can use that as well if you need. This event is being recorded, so we can later on feature it in the ILOGBDN, the Global Business Disability Network. And as I said, we also have the chat here where you can send some comments, and you can also use the function to ask your questions. Please feel free to ask any questions that you may have for the speakers while they are speaking, and via the Q&A session, we'll be checking the questions and taking them as soon as we can. Thank you again, really, for being here. It's such a pleasure to host this side event and having you on the line here. We also thank Microsoft for hosting this event in its premises here in New York. We also thank very much the UN Global Compact and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development for being our co-sponsors in this event. Today, together, we'll discuss how we can conduct businesses in a responsible and sustainable manner. Indeed, ESG has been gaining increasingly importance over the past years, and investors are even using this framework metrics for decision making. And ESG has also consolidated one of the 3 pillars of supporting sustainability strategies for business. And it is really great to have this conversation today with our excellent panelists, because it's a non-financial way to measure success and social impacts of companies. Disability inclusion in this case, mainly with regard to employment of persons with disabilities. So today, this event is organized at the initiative of the GBDN, Business Disability Network, which is coordinated by the ILO disability team, and more particularly by our colleagues here on the line, Jürgen Menz, who is connected here with us, and as well as Arya Tung. It's a network around 40 multinational companies with the aim of making the workspace more inclusive of persons with disabilities, and extra services and creating innovative ways to hire, employ, and retain persons with disabilities in companies. Indeed, 4 of the GBDN companies are here with us, and we are very happy to have them here. So in terms of the session flow today, each company or organization will have 8 minutes to speak, and we will start without further. We're very happy to have Atos, Microsoft, Capgemini here, as well as the UN Global Compact with us. So we will start now with our first speaker and first company here, which is Atos, which is also the chair of the Global Business Disability Network this year. And without further delay, I will give the floor to Neil Milliken, the Global Head of Accessibility for Atos, who will be the first speaker for Atos. So yeah, thank you, and Neil.
Thank you very much, Güler. So you already know my name. So yes, I'm the Global Head of Accessibility at Atos, and I'm very pleased to be talking to you about our sustainability-led approach to disability inclusion in the workplace. So I don't know whether or not you can see the slides, but that would be good because I've got some illustrations on them. So if we may go to the second slide. Super. We've aligned, that's the one, thank you. We've aligned as a leading company on disability and sustainability to look at making sure that we consider accessibility as part of our ESG. Yeah. Disability inclusion, accessibility, definitely a social topic, but in order to do this well at scale in large complex organizations, you need to have good governance. And so it really is the S and the G of our ESG programs. And this is something that we'll talk about a bit further in the next couple of minutes. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Quite some time ago now, in 2016, I attended a conference in Stockholm where a chap called Jim Tobias, who's one of the sort of luminary lights of early accessibility, gave a talk, and he said, you know, inaccessibility is kind of like pollution. And really, that was the start of what we were trying to do in terms of thinking about conceptualizing how we address inaccessibility and build programs at Atos. And if I may hand over to James, he's going to take the next couple of slides.
Great, thank you, Neil. I'm James Thurston. And if you could advance the slide to the next slide, please. I'm on Neil's global accessibility team at Atos. I lead our accessibility work here in North America. As Neil started to explain, I think it's really important and I think impactful that look at inaccessibility and the lack of inclusion, including in workplaces, but really everywhere, in the same way that we think about sustainability in other areas. In that really, if inaccessibility, a workplace that's not accessible or a workplace that's not inclusive of people with disabilities, employees with disabilities, is a failure of the in production process, just like pollution is. And importantly, the problems that arise from that failure in the planning and production process to everyone in society, or in this case, for today's topic, it really does present barriers. This lack of planning for accessibility at the beginning presents barriers to people with disabilities. The good news is that, and we'll talk a little bit about this, that in the same way that we deal with decarbonization and other kinds of pollution, we can be putting in metrics and monitoring and policies and governance systems that can really help us drive accessibility at scale across employers and enterprises. If you go to the next slide, please. So we have a picture here of a curb cut. Probably a lot of us have talked over the years about how curb cuts benefit all kinds of people. It's the same with digital accessibility, that if we plan for that, if we make it a part of the design and production process, including in how we create workplaces and maintain those, the benefits are really going to accrue to everyone. And you can think of some sort of temporary disabilities where you may be driving or you may be in a noisy train station like I was this morning. In accessibility functionality that we build into technology can really be beneficial to you with speech recognition, captions, text-to-speech, for example. If you go to the next slide, and Neil.
Thank you. And so, yes, we've talked about this in terms of externalities, and this is the language of ESG and decarbonisation. And when I was looking at how we dealt with the complexity of this in our organisation, rather than reinventing the wheel, I thought that we would take the 3 scopes process of decarbonisation and put that to run our programme. So we look at direct impact from resources that we own or control ourselves, so we need to design and produce accessible. Indirect impact of purchase resources and products and services. So we work with procurement to make sure that we buy accessible, and then influence. So the indirect impacts that occur across the value stream and looking upstream and downstream. And this is partly why I'm here today. You know, we need to foster an accessible environment, foster accessible products and services. Back to you, James.
Sure. In the next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of information on it. I'm just going to talk really briefly about sort of building on what Neil was just discussing in terms of the ecosystem approach, how we are working both within our own company globally, but also with the companies that we work with, the companies that we serve with our solutions, to provide the kind of accessibility at enterprise scale that really does make sure that people with disabilities are able to get into the employee lifecycle with different organizations. And so we are, from a business companies that we work with, we're absolutely providing them with a range of services, for example, to help them put in place these policies, define policies, and then support them with governance systems. From an internal perspective, Neil's team not only sort of clients and customers, but we're also responsible for the accessibility of our own company and walking the talk and making sure that we're doing all the kinds of compliance work that we need to be doing for our own employees with disabilities around the world. And then from an ecosystem perspective, really partnering with organizations like the ILO, like a lot of the companies here and other organizations, many people in the audience, to make sure that that we are continuing to raise awareness and drive best practices around accessibility and inclusion in the workplace. And all of our colleagues certainly on the global accessibility team are members of professional societies, different organizations, NGOs, and really helping to push that good practice out globally. Then the next slide.
Thank you. So then we have accessibility at the intersection of CSR and diversity. It's a separate topic for us, but you can see there right at the center is the reporting and the compliance, the social good and the SDGs, and supporting culture, employee experience. As a publicly floated company, we need to think about profits, but also people and the planet. And so everything is aligned here. So we may go on to the final slide, because I want to talk about disability inclusion and the SDGs. It wouldn't be COSP if we didn't talk about SDGs, but let's be honest about this. Whilst it is included, it's pretty buried. We do not have anything specifically mentioned, called out at the top level. And when we rely on no one left behind, we're risking omission as a key indicator for business sustainability reporting, which is the driver for making changes in industry. And James will have the final call to action because he's also working with G3 ICT on an initiative in this space.
Sure. If you can just stay on this slide for just a second. So yeah, we have as Neil mentioned, I think we've made a lot of progress, all of us working collectively around disability inclusion and accessibility, but we are still pretty embedded in a lot of these global tools. And we've got a great opportunity in moving forward towards the end of this year with the Global Digital Compact to make sure that it really does sort of not bury accessibility and disability in there. It's a bit buried right now. In this compact, the Global Digital Compact will come out of the Summit for the Future later this year. It's really exciting in that it's looking at and creating principles and actions for different divides: the digital divide, the innovation divide, the data divide, all critically important to people with disabilities around the world. But still, disability is sort of a bit of a very gently in the document right now. So G3ICT is actually really working to make it more explicit, to align a definition of accessibility with CRPD and other tools that have been useful to us. And so I would, Jürgen, if you can, I'd ask you maybe to put in the chat, there's a link if you want to get involved in really driving focus in that Global Digital Compact to make sure that it is focusing explicitly on people with disabilities and accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Neil, for this very interactive presentation. It's indeed very important that you reminded us today that we should take this digital accessibility into account, not only not at all as an afterthought, but really at the outset of how we plan our ecosystem, our structure in our companies, and how such big difference it could make to the employment of persons with disabilities in general. Thanks also for talking about the SDGs. Indeed, this is also a very important framework for us also in the ILO with the SDG number 8 on decent work. And we do believe that yet the SDGs and the 2030 agenda cannot be realized without the inclusion and the meaningful inclusion of persons with disabilities, and very importantly, also in this goal number 8. And yes, procurement, as you also mentioned, is a very important aspect when we purchase goods, services in our companies, organizations, to really do that with accessibility in mind. If we do, and our participants here on the line, we look around ourselves and see what kind of material are those materials that are in our offices, in our buildings, usable by persons with disabilities, persons who have visual, hearing, any types of sensory or physical or cognitive disabilities. And I think that's really something that we should question ourselves with. So thanks again for raising this important topics. And so now we will move on to our next speaker for today with Microsoft. And yeah, without further delay, I'll give the floor to Rylin Rodgers, the Disability Policy Advisor. Thank you. Over to you.
I'm thrilled to join this conversation, and really it's an opportunity to sort of build on what we've learned together across the business spectrum and across the employer spectrum. And I hope that you'll start to see that theme moving forward. We can go to the next slide. We won't dwell a lot in the numbers, but I think it always is important to remember that this is not a small issue or a small opportunity. When we think about the rate of those currently experiencing disability, the reality that any of us is likely to experience a variety of types of disabilities at different parts of our life course. And as James referenced, that sort of digital curve cut effect, that when we create technology that is accessible, it allows us all to participate in the economy fully. So it's a real opportunity. And on the next slide, you can see, I'm sort of preluding what I'm saying, that we absolutely see it as an opportunity. There's some question and concern in these conversations when we're thinking about accessibility in the SDGs or accessibility in ESG. Is it about regulation or reporting to move something forward that's a social issue or that is a nice to do? And for us, we don't think of it at all that way. We think about it as an economic opportunity. The fact that our company is better because we include the talents of people with disabilities, that it makes our products better, it makes our innovation better, and it allows us to drive forward. It also is absolutely about creating greater customer base. If we ensure that the people that are currently on our economic sidelines are bringing their talents to their economies and communities, then we have more opportunity to grow in a variety of ways. So for us, this is absolutely about a business imperative, about the belief that we all can grow, and without the talents of people with disabilities, our communities and our economies are significantly worse. So it's a real moving forward. So how do we do it? Let's talk and move to the next slide. We are, you may be aware, in a little bit of a moment. I always joke that I work for Microsoft, so I'm not allowed to leave the house without saying the words AI, but it's a real opportunity. The world is changing rapidly in the digital space. What's happening in technology is changing rapidly. And if we're going to think about how do we deploy locally, internationally, in businesses, as governments, AI, we need to think about responsible AI. And we often really start with the frame that accessible AI is responsible AI. You cannot have responsible deployment of artificial intelligence without focusing on accessibility. I love the fact that as a disabled woman, I've benefited from AI already. I also love the fact that it's often people with disabilities that are innovators and early adapters of technology. And that's particularly relevant in this moment. So we need to bring those voices to the regulatory conversation, to the development conversation, and to the innovation conversation to make sure that we have fairness, inclusivity, and accountability to really get to accessible AI. We move to the next slide. This is a look similar you saw from James, a look at how they're sort of tackling the issues. This is how we think about raising the bar on accessibility. You know, obviously technology is a huge piece of it. People are a huge piece of it, really expanding our skilling and hiring opportunities to make sure we're getting the very best talent. Partnership is absolutely critical, making sure that whether it's our customers, our NGO partners, our government partners, that we're integrating everyone into our ecosystem. And we're also aware that we need to be at policy conversations. So that's why we're in places like the UN, partnership with the ILO. We need to make sure that public policies are either designed, if they're new policies, to make sure that accessibility is a fundamental right, or in truth, there are many policies in governments globally that are outdated in terms of accessibility. So we'd like to bring our voice to the policy tables in partnership with the disability community to modernize those public policies. Next slide. And this really brings us to SDGs. Neil and James said very clearly that we cannot get to the 2030 goals unless we include disabled people and our issues in every SDG. You do not solve for the SDGs if you leave out a fourth of the world's population. So this is a priority, and we think about it as a lever to help move these issues forward. SDGs are part of that, and then on the next slide, you see ESGs. Move to the next slide. And really, we're at the starting point where there are some, in different markets, some increased regulatory attention to ESG reporting, and this is a real opportunity. If we're going to be transparent and honest, the oxygen, so to speak, on this topic has mostly gone to environmental issues. But you cannot have ESG without the S and the G. And that's where disability and accessibility comes to the table. And we anticipate the requirements and attention to this will become regulatory in more markets. And so how do we make sure that we leverage that so that we can get to those goals of digital inclusion, of physical inclusion, of bringing the incredible talents of disabled people off the sideline and into all of our workforces? Next slide. One of the pieces that has been key to our efforts is really setting universal accessibility training. And I think about this as positive in multiple pieces. It's been key to our culture at Microsoft that every employee, not some employees, not disabled employees, but every employee takes an accessibility 101. And what the piece of it that I love the best is not just the cultural piece, but it changes the ability to deliver products. When people are understanding from the very beginning that there are resources, there are awareness, there are colleagues who have particular expertise related to delivering accessible products. The other piece about this that really excites me is that we've had the opportunity to share it. And we are happy to share it with anyone, any of you. We will give it to you for free. You can move it on to your own learning system. You can customize it, but really it's an opportunity to make sure that everyone has access to basic information about digital accessibility, about accessibility broadly. And when I first arrived at Microsoft and saw it, it made me happy because I'd come from the not-for-profit world and working on employment issues, and saw time and time again that we spend a tremendous amount of resources and effort to train a disabled person on a piece of technology to allow them to do their work. We don't train anyone in their ecosystem, the person that's responsible for supporting them, their manager, or anyone else, and then we're surprised it doesn't work. So this idea that we create a universal environment where everyone has access to the same information is a critical part of getting to the S and the G. Next slide. The other piece is really about recruitment and talent. And we have lessons learned over the years that we're happy to share. We have a playbook for everything. But really, it's an effort to think very critically about what were the blockers to disabled talent coming in. How do we create a general awareness that the interview process is designed and intended to be accessible, that we want to know what accommodations that you use? How do we know that for some folks, particularly those in the neurodiversity community, a traditional question and answer interview may in fact be the blocker to showing their talent? So are there other designs? And then how do we be really intentional about, are there specific types of disabilities or experiences that are really not entering into our supply chain? And for us, that led to our support and employment program, where we learned that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were within the disability community one of the most underrepresented in employment and have tremendous talents that have been critical to our supply chain. So now we have over 60 different roles supporting our campuses around the world of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities through our support and employment program, which has created really nice learnings about what the opportunities are to support that workforce, and really has been incredibly helpful in helping us to do business everywhere. So really thinking about the multiple layers and then sharing among partnerships like ILO about what we're learning from each other, because it's a journey. We are not perfect. We continue to strive to get better. We continue to think about whose talent don't we yet have at Microsoft, and how do we recruit them, and how do we make sure they're successful to bring their career here. Next slide. And then the other piece of the conversation, and this really goes to some of the reporting that ESGs require of us, is we need to create an environment where people are willing to share their disability status. As we know from the data, not all disabilities are apparent, and different points of government have rules around, whether you could ask or tell. And at Microsoft, we do something called Count Me In, which is a global self-identification program. And it really allows us to understand our workforce and understand what needs we're missing, what accessibility features we should be thinking about, and how we literally build the physical office space. And what we've learned over time is that we get to higher rates of self-identification by building trust. When people are having success, when they're seeing their needs met, when they're finding their workplace to be accessible, when they're finding that their manager supports their accommodations, then they're ready to self-ID and move forward. It is the challenge of the moment to take our great learning from the US, and I'm noting on my slide that that's actually not our current number. Our current number is higher than that. So, so the ongoing goal of getting to higher and higher numbers. But the other piece of it is to grow the participation globally. And you have to do a little bit of shift about culture, different countries' definitions of disabilities. This is one of the challenges globally about how do we count, but it is the work of the moment. Next slide. I'll just close there saying once again that we're happy to share our learning and learn from you and continue this conversation. So I will pass it back.
Thank you so much, Rylin. I really, really liked your speech, because you're already, and we are together here, already moving from the why, including persons with disabilities, and in the ESG framework to the how. And you give us a lot of tools and ideas. You spoke about universality of digital accessibility, and yet it's not a perfect process. We are all learning. It's a journey. We all have a lot to learn how to make things accessible. But you also highlighted that we should not leave persons with disabilities alone in this framework. Yet we can train persons with disabilities, users of digital or assistive devices, on how it can be used, what accessibility features are existing, what's new, and it's indeed evolving very fast, and especially with the artificial intelligence innovations as well. It's good to train persons with disabilities, but we should also think about those who are indeed surrounding persons with disabilities. There are managers, colleagues, leaders, other persons in the company. So if there is an issue, if there is a barrier, the responsibility is not always or only on the persons who are using, but also on everybody, to make it work, to make it available and affordable for persons with disabilities in companies or organizations. So that was really useful, and I'm sure that and all colleagues here on the line would really like to access the tools that you mentioned. So that's very well noted. And now we'll move on to our next speaker, and we'll give the floor now to Capgemini and to Julia Lièvre-Cormier. And she's corporate social responsibility lead and financial services for the UK and North America. So Julia, over to you.
Thank you very much. So indeed, I'm really glad to be here. I'm also here with my colleague, Lauren Kimball, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Lead for North America. Just a few words maybe on Capgemini. So it's a global technology and business transformation partner with more than 350,000 people all over the globe in more than 50 countries and headquartered in Paris. So, and maybe we will see the slides in few minutes. So just for our vision of diversity, so it's embracing all dimensions, and you can go to the next slide. And in order to take actions and commitment beyond the inclusion of people with disability is a key priority globally. Historically at Capgemini, and Rylin just talked a little about the way we track data. We've done it for environmental sustainability, and we've done it also for gender and women. And we had then for each local countries, because indeed the context is different in all the countries, local specific programs. But as we are in the process right now of revisiting our ESG targets to extend them from 2025 to 2030, we are currently in discussions thinking, would it make sense to actually track globally people with disabilities? So it's a big topic also we are focusing on. And I would like to talk a little more about the Valuable 500 that James and Neil also mentioned quickly, and specifically to benchmark ourselves on the 5 recommendations from their ESG paper. So looking also at our journey and where we're at and what are the next steps. So the first one, if we look at workforce representation, so we are really proud that the representation of people with disability increased by 53% between 2020 and 2023. This is due because of external recruitment, but also and mainly because of self-disclosure. And you just touched base on it. It's really important. It's also showing the trust and the awareness within the workplace. So in order to do that, for example, in the US and Canada, we have a global self-ID campaign and year-long communications through different channels, our employee resource group, the onboarding, the town halls, and many others. And we really insist on a few things. So first, that the information is confidential. Second, it's only shared in aggregate. And third, that this data is also going to help us to be more inclusive and drive those programs to better understand the people in the company. Some of the challenges that we see, though, Capgemini is a very large company that grown through acquisition, also like Sanofi. So there are challenges also with our local HR systems that are not all fully ready yet to capture the ability status. And the second also challenge that we see regarding this is also tracking the data. We know that the definition of disability is different from a country to another. So it's difficult to align the data globally and yet still look at the different verbiage. So that's the balance we're trying to find right now. having this global agreed upon standard and language, and at the same time still taking context the local specificities. Now, if we look at the training, so training, we have awareness modules on disability that are available from the beginning of the onboarding and throughout the company. We also have live trainings, for example, about disability etiquette. We also think about the caregivers of people with disability. We know that many of them are, and of course, accompanying also the managers within the company to track that. And one important point that was mentioned too is partnerships. So we also partner with nonprofits and with clients to work together on those topics and move forward. So for example, with Cigna, with Disability In, and a few other organizations. The challenge that we face here also regarding training is how we are able to reach even more people and make sure we meet people where they're at. And I think that's where we have conversations. Should we make mandatory more training, or how we can make sure that we drive that even forward? Lauren, would you like to move forward with the Employee Resource Group?
Yes, thank you so much, Julia, and good morning, afternoon, everyone. As Julia said, I'm Lauren Kimball. I lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for the US and Canada, and I'm joining you today from Los Angeles, California. So I'll pick up where Julia left off, which is the third recommendation, which is employee resource groups. So at Capgemini, it is a key belief that in order to drive positive change in the workplace and create an inclusive culture, we must get authentic feedback and have direct communication with our employees. One of the ways that we do that is through our employee resource groups. And we have 4 global employee resource groups that all have local chapters across the group. Capability is our ERG focused on disability inclusion. Its mission is to provide advocacy, representation, and resources to employees with disabilities, those with functional limitations, and employees who are caregivers. It provides a safe space for discussion, support, and education for all employees to learn about disabilities, accessibility, and compliance. So right now we have 11 different chapters across the globe. All of our ERGs focus on planning events throughout the year that focus on career development, community engagement, culture, and clients. And like Julia said, they also work really closely with our partners like Saramount, Cigna, and Disability In to bring additional external events to our colleagues. This year, one example I want to share is that Capability partnered with our mentorship employee resource group called Mentoring Matters to provide a special mentorship for colleagues with disabilities and pairing them with a mentor specifically to help them navigate careers at Capgemini. And I just think this is a really good example of allyship and collaboration across our employee resource groups. The fourth recommendation from the Valuable 500 is digital accessibility. At Capgemini, even though we do focus on technology and digital solutions, we have a broader vision of accessibility than just digital accessibility. And we've embraced this journey focusing on 4 main streams of accessibility, of course, in partnership with our IT team, learning and development, marketing and communications, and our facilities. So they are accessibility of our learning and development trainings, accessibility of our communications, accessibility of our workplaces. And I have to say, this one is, of course, a challenge because being a global organization, we have beautiful offices all over the world, many in historic buildings that provide obviously unique constraints when we're trying to be accessible. And many of our buildings were one of many tenants, which impedes our ability to have influence. So we are working through this and constantly trying to make sure that we're as accessible as possible in our workplaces. And the fourth one is accessibility of digital tools, which of course is an imperative for a tech organization. We currently follow the targets and get assessed through the WCAG 2.0 standard and have remediation plans if needed. And this not only applies for the internal applications that we build at Capgemini, but it's an expectation we have of all of our external IT suppliers. Specifically in the US, and I know we mentioned this earlier, but we've been working with Disability In and completed the Disability Equality Index to provide us with local recommendations to help us accelerate our disability inclusion journey. And so one of the recommendations that we're working on right now is creating an employee disability inclusion guide to help our employees navigate all the accessibility resources that we have available. So I'm very excited for that to be done later this year. The fifth recommendation is goals. Today, our main goal is focusing on inclusion. And as Julia mentioned, we are in the process of renewing our ESG policy. And so we're in discussion about the best way to incorporate disability inclusion goals into the new version of our ESG policy. Through that process, one of the topics that has come up that I think Rylin mentioned is neurodiversity inclusion. So we're debating, do we need to include that as part of disability inclusion? Do we need to have a separate resources for that? So that's one of the things that we're working through. And I think Neil mentioned earlier, governance is extremely important. So it's going to be really important that we are including disability inclusion front and center in our upcoming ESG policy. So as you can see, we're on a journey, and we're so grateful for all of the partners and employee advocates that we've had that have really helped lead the way through this process. And I look forward to continuing the conversation as we continue to evolve our efforts. So back to you, Güler.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Julia, for highlighting here the importance of nothing about us without us when creating policies and strategies in our companies. In the ILO, we also do value the importance of employee resource groups, as we do believe those are safe spaces for employees with disabilities, or employees who have dependents with disabilities, or for both. I mean, an employee can both be a person with disabilities and also be a support person or care provider for another persons with disabilities. And it is really important to include the voices of those employees in the life of the organization, of the company, to make sure that the culture of the company reflects their opinions. And it was also very interesting that you highlighted the importance of going beyond digital accessibility, and the fact that some buildings, and as you said, some listed buildings, which sometimes we may be proud of our facilities and buildings or how nice they are, but in the way that the built environment sometimes could impose barriers to not only to the moving of persons with disabilities, but also to their participation and power and impact they could have in the life of the organization. So this is really important. So thank you for that. And I will now give the floor to our next company, which is Sanofi. And we have here Stuart Persky, who is the Director for Equal Employment Opportunity and HR Compliance and Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. So over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for including Sanofi in the discussion this morning. And also thank you to Microsoft for hosting. My name is Stuart Persky. I do not have any slides this morning, and I describe myself as a Caucasian male. I am wearing a blue suit and a blue shirt, and my pronouns are he and him. It's my pleasure to be here today and to talk about Sanofi. Sanofi, just a little bit of background on the company, is a global pharmaceutical company with corporate headquarters in France. Sanofi operates in over 70 countries, has about 86,000 employees globally and about 13,000 employees in the US. Sanofi's portfolio is based around 4 global business units, and we employ employees with a variety of backgrounds and different skill sets in areas such as home office, finance, IT, HR, sales and marketing, manufacturing, and research and development. Some of our better known products is Dupixent. And then on the consumer healthcare side, there is Icy Hot, of which in the US, Shaquille O'Neal is a spokesperson, and then also Allegra and Zysol. I am based in the US headquarters, which is in New Jersey, and I work within North America Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And for most of my discussion this morning, I'm going to focus more on the North America perspective, which is very closely aligned with the global DEI, ESG, and CSR programs. Within North America DEI, we are responsible for delivering the diversity, equity, inclusion strategy for the US and Canada, as well as compliance with equal employment opportunity regulations. I've been with the company for over 23 years and have seen lots of changes over that time frame. And I've also worked in different areas within DEI, HR, as well as IT and finance. I'd like to provide a little bit context on Sanofi's journey in this space. Like many pharmaceutical companies and also, like many of my colleagues on this panel, the company's grown through mergers and acquisitions and has evolved through different divestitures and consolidations, and has also had different leadership as well as operating models. And I mention this because the company's DEI strategy was formed under its current CEO, Paul Hudson. So the company's journey in DEI, ESG, and CSR will look very different from your organization's journey. But at the same time, from listening to my colleagues today, there are many similarities across all of our organizations that I found to be very interesting. So Sanofi has a global DEI strategy, DEI ambition, which is that we want to reflect the diversity of our communities, unleashing our best selves every day to transform the practice of medicine. And in order to achieve this ambition, Sanofi's DEI strategy is based upon 3 pillars. And I'm going to frame everything based upon these 3 different pillars. The first pillar is reflect, which is about building workforce diversity. The second pillar is unleash, about creating an inclusive workplace culture. And then transform, which is engaging with our diverse communities. But when we discuss reflect, which is building workforce diversity, this includes race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity, veteran status, as well as disability status. We ask all employees in the US to self-identify on these attributes at the time of application and also upon employment, and then at different moments throughout the employee life cycle. We store this information similar to what was said earlier in a confidential HR system. This information is reported only in the aggregate, and only individuals that need to have access to this information have access to this information. And we reinforce consistently that hiring managers and other decision makers do not have access to this information and do not use this information when making any selection decisions. As part of this, and as mentioned also similarly to other organizations, the company conducts regular self-ID campaigns to help drive engagement to self-identify. While this information we know is critical for the company's DEI strategy, it is voluntary for employees to complete. We know that attributes such as disability status may change throughout employees' life cycle, and we use these campaigns to encourage employees to self-identify. We also know that self-ID rates for people with disabilities lacks many of the other self-ID rates for race, ethnicity, and gender. And we use these campaigns as opportunities to reinforce the importance of self-identification on how this information is used for the company's DEI, ESG, and CSR strategies, and also how this information is confidentially maintained. When we look at the pillar of unleash, which is about workforce inclusion, it's where we want employees to bring their best selves to work every day. And as part of this, we talk often about psychological safety. And this concept is interwoven into different trainings, such as inclusive leadership, which is designed for all people leaders, as well as unconscious bias training, which all employees are encouraged to complete. Psychological safety is a shared belief where members of a team feel that it is okay to take risks, to express their ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes, all without fear of retribution or reprisal. One key focus within Sanofi, within North America in the Unleash pillar, is the company's employee resource groups and affinity groups. And the company also has employee resource groups at the global level as well. All of these organizations are grassroots. They have executive sponsors who are senior leaders and have chairs and a leadership team. ERGs and affinity groups help drive the company's CSR, ESG, and DEI strategy, and also play an active role in programming. As well as they often act as the voice of the customer to help drive accountability. One of the employee resource groups within North America is around disability inclusion. It's called the Capable and Able Network, or CAN. And CAN has delivered key programming over the years. These events have included speakers on the importance of mental health and has promoted Sanofi's It's Okay to Not Be Okay programming, which talks about mental well-being, and has also included programming on disability etiquette, which has included employees with visible and non-visible disabilities sharing their stories. We've also leaned into the CAN ERG when we have self-ID campaigns to have the executive sponsors and leadership talk about why self-ID is important, why they have self-identified, and how self-ID plays a significant role into the company's DEI strategy. As part of the Unleash pillar, we also look at external benchmarking and recognition. Sanofi is also a member of the Valuable 500 and is also a member of Disability In. And Disability In is, Sanofi utilizes the Disability Equality Index, which is an external benchmarking and recognition tool, which measures the company's disability inclusiveness across different programs and policies. The company is very proud to have said that we've earned 100 over the past several years for the DEI, which is a significant undertaking and involves many individuals across many different functions in the company in order to maintain. The final pillar of Transform focuses on the company's commitment to engaging with and advocating for diverse communities where we live and work. The company has a strong corporate social responsibility strategy, which includes programming, philanthropy, and volunteerism and works very closely with organizations which support marginalized communities, including those that support individuals with disabilities to help find employment for these individuals. And employees are encouraged to use, they are entitled to have 2 days where they can donate for volunteerism, and all employees are encouraged to utilize those 2 days. One of the other areas within the Unleash pillar is supplier diversity. And the company has a goal to increase women and minority-owned suppliers, which also includes disability-owned businesses. In addition, the company is driving accountability for diversity in clinical trials. Clinical trials are a major component of clinical research. People may experience the same disease differently, so it is essential that clinical trials include people with a variety of lived experiences and living conditions, as well as characteristics such as race and ethnicity, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability status. Increased diversity in clinical trials will result in the decreased health inequities, as well as better health outcomes. I do want to thank you for allowing me time today to talk about Sanofi, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It was indeed our pleasure to listen to you, and really interesting that you highlighted the importance of the intersectionality among the disability community, and it is true that persons with disabilities are a very diverse group with different identities, and these identities can intersect with the way they can experience things at work or outside work, and this is very important. You also mentioned the strengths and challenges of self-disclosure. It is really important to create a workspace for everybody where everybody, each person, can disclose their needs, their disability, and I think it's not just a yes or no situation. Some persons may identify as persons with disabilities in some contexts, but not in others. Some disabilities can be, as we say, visible or invisible, but even in the case that they would be invisible, they would be only invisible to the eyes of others, but it would be really visible for the person who has that experience. So that's why what you shared and your actions that you are putting in place could be very inspiring for our colleagues here on the line. So thank you so much. And last but not least, we'll now give the floor to the UN Global Compact, which is here represented by Megan Galvin, the Corporate Sustainability Manager. And we'll now listen from the UN Global Compact. So yes, over to you, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us here online. I want to start by thanking the ILO Global Business and Disability Network for convening this event today. And thanks also to Microsoft for hosting us here in person in New York. My name is Megan Galvin. I am the Labor Rights and Decent Work Manager at the UN Global Compact. If we could pull up the slides, please. I'll start by giving a quick overview of the UN Global Compact for those who might not be familiar with it. The UN Global Compact is the world's largest voluntary corporate sustainability initiative. We have more than 24,000 participating companies, and in order to sign up to the UN Global Compact, a company has to commit at the CEO level to respecting our 10 principles, which cover the topics of human rights, labor rights, environmental sustainability, and anti-corruption. And then within our labor rights, there's 4 different principles focusing on labor. They're derived from the ILO's fundamental principles and rights at work, and they cover the topics of child labor, forced labor, collective bargaining, and freedom of association. And then the final one, Principle 6, is on non-discrimination in respect to employment and occupation, which is where we really focus a lot of our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then all the more specific aspects of that, including gender equality, respect of inclusion in regards to age, nationality, and then of course persons with disabilities as well. That said, it is very important to call out the need to explicitly mention persons with disabilities in the broader ESG, DEI conversations as well. If you could go to the next slide. A lot of these statistics have already been laid out by some of my fellow panelists here today, but just to set some more context, 15% of the world's population has some form of disability. This is over 1 billion people, and with the private sector employing 2/3 of the workforce, there is really a large space for companies to advance this issue and include people with disabilities more in the workplace. There is also a business case to the inclusions of persons with disabilities in respect to employment and occupation. It's reported that companies have 2 times more profit when they lead on key disability and inclusion criteria. And then there's other benefits for business as well, including utilizing different approaches to problem solving, having higher levels of retention and engagement amongst employees, and then a better reputation from the companies as well, amongst other companies as well as investors. The last 2 stats on this slide are taken from the UN Global Compact's annual report, where 60% of UN Global Compact companies report to have policies in place on inclusion of people with disabilities, which is a good start, but it's still quite lower than other labor topics. 80% of UN Global Compact participating companies then report to have policies in place on our other labor topics covered by the 10 principles, including occupational safety and health, freedom of association, child labor, etc. So there is definitely still more room for companies to make more explicit commitments on including persons with disabilities in business, and then also taking actions based on those commitments. So if you go to the next slide, I've outlined some of our suggested business actions for companies to take, which has been very well highlighted by my fellow panelists here who are already taking these actions. So first, at the Global Compact, we encourage companies to create a commitment on human rights that includes an explicit reference to persons with disabilities. For example, on the grounds of non-discrimination as included in our 10 principles and our Principle 6 for our participating companies. And then it's also, of course, important to make leadership aware of the business case for these disability inclusion programs that many of these companies joining us here today have been running. Once this commitment is in place, of course, then the implementation phase is very important. We've heard a lot of good suggested actions on how to implement these kind of commitments today. But first, I think just having the right mindset too, to focus on skills rather than stereotypes. And this also benefits businesses too, to access a huge pool of untapped talent, and really maximize the workforce and not only do good for the Sustainable Development Goals and the ESG agenda, but also for their business's bottom line. We also encourage companies to undertake ongoing due diligence efforts. And through these due diligence efforts, they can identify any actions that they're taking that may have adverse impacts on the rights of persons with disabilities. And that can be their own employees, their clients that they work with, or other stakeholders as well. And then, of course, if these adverse impacts are found through due diligence efforts, then it's important to implement remediation as well. And then finally, it is really important to communicate and report on progress, gathering together through ways such as the ILO Global Business and Disability Network and sharing success stories, such as participating in this panel today and listening in, is really important to build a more inclusive workforce. And then, of course, reporting on progress, we talked about a little bit today, is really important to track progress and drive change. So if you go to the next slide, I've already included some stats here from the UN Global Compact's mandatory reporting system, our communication on progress. We've recently revamped the communication on progress. In the past, companies could just submit a PDF of their sustainability report or whatever they would like. But now companies are required to fill out a questionnaire in alignment with our 10 principles. So I've already included here some of the findings from our 2023 data with around 5,000 participants who were selected to participate in the first round of our new questionnaire. And you can see that there's still a lot of room for improvement on this topic. Only 38% of companies review topics related to non-discrimination on even an ad hoc basis. Only 16% of companies have annual targets and goals to track progress on non-discrimination policies. And then 18% provide training on non-discrimination, and only 11% then work with suppliers on non-discrimination. So clearly there is a lot more room for improvement on this topic. And then if you go to the next slide, we do have some helpful resources and next steps for companies who are interested in then driving this progress that is so needed on this topic. So the first one listed here is an e-learning module that was developed by the UN Global Compact and the ILO together on our Principle 6 on non-discrimination and DEI and how to really make the business case for including persons with disabilities in your business practices. And then the second resource is another resource that we developed together with the ILO on the Guide for Business and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it lays out actions that companies can take in respect to their own workforce, as well as the marketplace, and then the community and the business case for all of these actions as well. And then the third resource listed here is a step-by-step action guide for companies to set targets to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And this looks at different aspects of inclusion, but also, of course, for people with disabilities. And then the final resource listed here is to better understand the human rights impact and the due diligence efforts that companies can take on non-discrimination in employment and occupation through our Business and Human Rights Navigator. So on the final slide then is my email if anyone has any questions on this or any ways that the UN Global Compact can help me more. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much. It was really great to hear from you as well. And thanks so much for sharing these resources. This was our final speaker today for now, and we will start with some of the questions. But before, let me give you an important information about the resource that will be, because I know that our colleagues and listeners here on the line are so keen on receiving resources, and they were asking also in the chat, and our ILO colleagues have already provided with answers. But speaking about resources, an important one that will be published very soon by the Global Business Disability Network. It's a guide called The Strategic Imperative of Disability Inclusion in Corporate ESG Practices. It will be launched in the next annual conference of the GBDN, which will be held on the 27th and 28th of November in Geneva. You are all welcome to that conference. So this is something also to take note. And there were some questions about disability wording and how we can mention persons with disabilities and the resources, and that's great because we were able to provide in the chat some answers which I hope can be useful to each one of you. This is great also because it gives us a bit of time. We have a few minutes left, so I will then ask a question to each one of our companies or organizations here today. Which is the question I would like to ask for now, is could you give two two opportunities, but also two challenges, or maybe two challenges first and two opportunities after, on disability inclusion in your own company or organization. So two challenges, I would just, if I mention this, what would come to your mind, and two opportunities. What would be those ones? So I guess maybe we can go in the reverse order of speakers, if that's okay. So I don't make Gan, if you would like to start trying to answer that question. And looking at the time, we have about 10 minutes left. So maybe we could give approximately 1 minute or 1 minute, 30 seconds per organization.
Sure, thanks so much. Happy to start. So I think I want to go back to some of the suggested actions that businesses can take to advance the ESG agenda, and then more specifically the rights and inclusion of people with disabilities in occupation. And that is that the Global Compact encourages companies to develop some kind of a human rights due diligence process to identify the potential adverse effects that they have, that companies could have on people with disabilities within their own operations, their supply chains, their customers, etc. So I think first, it can be challenging to get that due diligence in place, but it's a really important first step to then identify the actions that are needed to be taken to better include persons with disabilities. And then once that's in place, then I think the second thing that comes to mind is really being able to set targets on including persons with disabilities better in business, especially based on the adverse effects that have been identified by the due diligence process. I mentioned on the last slide that we do have a guide that we've developed on the steps that companies can take to identify certain targets and KPIs that they can set to then make progress on this topic, which is really important to have those KPIs in place to then track progress year and year.
Thank you so much. Stuart, the word to you.
Sure. So one challenge which I mentioned is the challenge of having employees self-identify that they are an individual with a disability. And this is very important for companies like Sanofi, as well as others in the room, that need to report to the federal government on their rates of individuals who self-identify. So there is still concern. Employees don't want to self-identify that they have a disability. One of the items that we've seen that does make a difference is having senior leadership state that they have a disability and having them be upright and forefront about what that means and why they've self-identified, as well as reiterating why this is important. So part of the benefit of having self-ID campaigns is it reinforces that message. I also think, one of the other challenges is there are still some stereotypes that occur with employing individuals with disabilities, that for example, that the cost of a reasonable accommodation is excessive, which most research has shown that accommodation is probably less than $500, if anything at all. And the way technology is today with Microsoft, it's already built in. So the investment for an accommodation is very minimal. And I think it's important just to reinforce that with hiring managers, with leadership, that there is great benefits to hiring individuals with disability for a number of reasons, and that the challenges are ultimately very minimal.
Thank you so much for sharing these challenges and opportunities. And I do believe that a lot of companies and organizations do face similar conditions. So that's very interesting. I will now give the floor to Lauren and Julia.
Sure, thank you. Oh, I'll start, Julia, you can add. I was going to say, we've covered a lot of these already. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is being a global organization. And I think, I don't remember which of the panelists mentioned it, but getting everyone culturally comfortable with self-ID and aligning on the language, right? Because you have to adapt to the cultures, and then you have to still have it in one global system where we as an organization can report out. So getting that alignment, and especially being an organization that grows through acquisition, so there's constantly new changes. So getting everyone aligned on a global set of appropriate language that also incorporates the nuance and the cultural differences in every country so that you can get the most or the highest response rate is a challenge that we're working on. And then I was going to say, along with that comes opportunity. So aligning that communication, but I kind of want to pick up what a couple people spoke about, which is something we've really been looking into, which is the opportunity, the business opportunity. And really, there's so much talent out there, and it's up to us to make sure that we're having an inclusive workplace where people can bring their talents and be successful and thrive and not find it too challenging or not feel like they're being included. And there's just such a talent market that I think we still have an opportunity to tap into. So that would be my challenge, I'd say, or my opportunity.
Right, and maybe just to add to that, indeed, and it's something that we mentioned, those challenges and opportunities, and we've seen it, I think, really clearly today that we have many common challenges and opportunities. So continuing to work together with our clients and different organizations helps a lot also to move even forward faster.
Thank you so much. Rylin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think when I think about challenges, I often turn to the word discoverability. So that idea that the disabled talent pool knows that we're looking for them, knows that we're welcoming them, and that their talents are needed in a variety of roles. Too often, we have pathways and skilling where individuals with disabilities may not see themselves in various corporate settings and roles. And so that awareness piece is a challenge. I work on public policy, so it would be remiss not to raise the reality that there are outdated policies in different countries that serve as blockers to people with disabilities joining the workforce. There are income and asset limits that create a difficult transition for needed social or other supports. And I think modernizing that policy will be a key part of our collective work moving forward. In terms of opportunities, I'm incredibly excited about how rapidly accessibility is accelerating, particularly in the digital space. We're seeing really almost daily changes in what's possible. And I am just delighted about how that can unblock. And I think the other opportunity is really the tremendous power that disabled talent brings to jobs, and seeing that power unleashed and the economic impact of when we move people into roles and are utilizing their talent, whether it's within each of our companies or across a country or the global economy. It's pretty exciting to think about that opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And now let's hear from the chair of the GBDN, James and Neil, if you would like to go.
Thank you. So people have already mentioned fragmentation and all of the different challenges of self-ID. I think that one of the other areas is actually when we're supporting assistive technology, because there is a lot of it available right now, is interoperability in that ever-changing environment. That's also an opportunity, because as we get better at this, we can have systems that really understand this, and we can be proactive and go from a sort of bespoke to broke model to something that's truly evergreen. And then on top of that, I think that the change of culture where you get people that suddenly understand it, that really understand that it's not just about permanent disability, but the situational and everything else, that flips the model. It makes people understand, and then you get this sort of snowball effect as people really start to build that culture of psychological safety.
Great. Thanks, Neil. This is James. If I can just add, I think we've heard a lot about a great theme that I love, which is sort of data, certainly around self-identification, but I think we can be both a challenge and an opportunity discovering and using data internally as well to support more inclusive workplaces. We can look across the IT estate. We do this with ourselves and with our customers. Look across the IT estate and see to what extent are employees tapping into the great accessibility that Microsoft built into their tools or not yet, and then using that as an opportunity to really drive greater awareness about as we've heard from others as well, the power of this built-in accessibility that can be so useful to a range of employees.
Great. Thank you so much, James and Neil. It was really insightful for us. I guess we are coming towards the end of this side event and our allocated time. So I may just take a few seconds to thank the interpreters and captioners for helping us to make this event a more inclusive space. Indeed. Thank you to the GBDN team that's also behind the screen and behind in the other side of the world almost for the preparation of this great event. Thanks you, of course, to our great panelists and Microsoft for hosting us here. And of course, thank you so much to each one of you here for watching and listening to this event today. We really hope you enjoyed it. And more important than everything, we wish you a great COSP, a great conference of state parties this week. It's kicking off today and tomorrow more officially. Already a lot of events are happening tomorrow. It was great that we were starting this week all together here. It was an honor for me to moderate this side event. Yeah, we wish you a great day. Bye-bye. Thank you.